She wasn't royal. No crown, no protocol, just a small suitcase, a Spanish lullaby, and 11 quiet years spent nurturing the heart of a future king. And then she was dismissed. No formal statement, no farewell from the palace. Why would a nanny so deeply loved by Prince George, almost like a second mother, suddenly fired after 11 years? While the public believed it was merely a routine staffing change, a tense argument erupted between William and Catherine, exposing fractures never seen before in the royal family's most perfect image. And shortly after Princess Anne appeared in a private closed-door meeting, from that moment on, everything began to shift. What really happened? Did the pure love of a child unintentionally touch the most fragile corner of a mother's heart? Or did the father choose to sacrifice the last warm bond just to preserve an image too fragile to crack? In the misty dawn of March 2014, Kensington Palace stood in majestic silence, broken only by the chirping of sparrows in the royal gardens, where English roses swayed gently in the early breeze. Maria Theresa Turian Borallo, a 43-year-old woman with a calm demeanor and piercing eyes, stepped through the palace's side gate. Her low-heeled shoes tapped lightly on the cobblestone path, silent, as if trained to blend into the ancient walls. Clad in the signature brown coat of Norland College, a symbol of dedication, professionalism, and quiet commitment, she carried a small suitcase containing modest clothes, a paperback on child psychology, and a monumental responsibility to care for Prince George III in line to the British throne, an 8-month-old with clear blue eyes and a smile that melted hearts. Maria was no stranger to pressure. Norland College, the world's most prestigious nanny training institution, had forged her through rigorous courses, teaching her to read a child's mind like an open book, handle emergencies with a doctor's calm, and even drive defensively to protect royalty in dire situations. She was trained to be invisible, never to grace tabloid headlines, never to let personal emotions overshadow duty, never to step beyond her role as a silent servant. But as the heavy oak door of the nursery closed behind her, and Maria lifted George from his intricately carved crib, adorned with royal motifs, she knew she was more than a nanny. To the boy, she was a world, a gentle, warm sky, where he could rest without worry. Each morning, as the first sunlight slipped through thick silk curtains, Maria's voice rose like a lullaby. Buenos dias, pequeño príncipe. Good morning, little prince. She taught George his first Spanish words, each syllable flowing like a melody from sol sun to luna moon. She sang ancient Spanish folk songs, her voice rising and falling, evoking tales of olive groves and sunlit Mediterranean villages. Every bottle she prepared for George was measured with precision, warmed to the perfect temperature, as if it were not just a task, but a sacred ritual, a way to weave her love into every moment with the boy. Those early days in the palace were far from easy. George, though a prince, was still a child, with sudden cries and sleepless nights. But Maria, with boundless patience, was always there, soothing him with stories, hugs, and lullabies. She became George's anchor, the one he sought when his curious eyes sparkled or his tiny lips trembled with fear. To Maria, caring for George was not just a job. It was a bond built from small, meaningful moments one neither imagined could ever be threatened. But not all was as serene as the morning light. One night as the palace slept, Catherine was stirred by a strange maternal instinct, a gnawing unease. She slipped on a white silk robe, her bare feet gliding across the cold marble floors, hurrying toward George's room. But as she neared, her heart tightened. Through the door's cracks, she saw Maria already there, cradling George tightly, his small hands clutching her dress. Maria, with the sharp instincts of a seasoned caregiver, had noticed George's slight fever before Catherine sensed anything amiss. She quietly checked his temperature, placed a cool cloth on his forehead, and called the palace doctor, her calm but firm voice echoing through the small phone. As Catherine approached, she heard Maria whisper a Spanish lullaby. Duermete mi niño, sleep my love, her voice a soothing breeze easing George's fever and comforting his tender heart. Catherine stood frozen in the hallway, her white robe swaying in the dark, her eyes fixed on the scene. Maria, with natural tenderness, held George as if he were her own. Catherine smiled, a flicker of gratitude for Maria's devotion, but it quickly faded. Deep within, a cold unease stirred like a sudden gust, chilling her heart. Maria had acted before her, sensing George's fever before she, the mother, had. It was more than dedication. It was a painful reminder. Maria, though just a nanny, seemed to know George more deeply than she did. Did Maria doubt her ability as a mother? Catherine wondered, or had her royal duties pulled her so far from her son that Maria had filled the void? Catherine walked away, her heels clicking steadily on the marble. But her mind couldn't shake the image, George's tiny hands clutching Maria's dress as if she were his entire sky. An invisible thread was forming, pulling her son away. And though Catherine couldn't yet name the feeling, she knew it would become a problem, a tiny crack in the perfect portrait of the royal family, one that might one day shake the palace to its core. Time passed like pages in a fairy tale, and Prince George, from an 8-month-old with clear blue eyes, grew into a lively, curious child, carrying the royal aura, yet brimming with the innocence of any boy. In his early years, he was enveloped by the love of his mother, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and the devoted care of Maria Theresa Turian, Barallo, the nanny he affectionately called Marta. But in George's tender heart, Maria held a special place, one even Catherine, with her radiant smile and elegant poise under the media's glare, struggled to reach. George named her Marta, a name he invented, a private secret between them, a world no one else could enter. To him, Marta was more than a nanny. She was the storyteller with a lilting Spanish voice, the friend who listened to his childish tales, the one who taught him to tie his shoes with a silly song he sang daily. Above all, she was the one who sneaked buttery shortbread biscuits into Kensington Palace's small kitchen, treats the royal chefs with their strict nutritional rules rarely allowed. Each warm, crisp biscuit was a secret gift, a symbol of Maria's love for the boy far beyond her role as hired help. In the afternoons, when Catherine was occupied with royal receptions, preparing for international tours, or attending charity events with her dazzling smile, Maria sat with George on a plush rug in the reading room. Under the warm glow of an antique desk lamp, she opened the Gruffalo and read in expressive Spanish, turning each story into a magical adventure. Un monstreo horrible, she'd exclaim, describing the monster, making George giggle, his eyes twinkling like stars. Marta, tell it again, he'd beg, and Maria, with her gentle smile, always obliged, even after dozens of readings. She taught him to draw vibrant houses under sunny skies, shared stories of Spanish olive fields, and sometimes, when no one was watching, slipped him a biscuit, its buttery scent sparking his brightest grin. But those moments, so warm and loving for George, pierced Catherine's heart like tiny needles. One day, picking George up from kindergarten in an elegant blue silk dress, her smile as beloved as ever, she expected a tight hug from her son. Instead, George raced past her, down the stone hallway, straight into Maria's waiting arms. Marta, let me tell you what I drew today. He beamed as if his world revolved around her. Maria knelt, stroking his hair, her smile like sunlight, listening intently to his tale of a painting. Catherine stood, arms still outstretched, her smile frozen like a statue. She stepped forward, trying to scoop George into her arms, but he gave only a half-hearted hug, his eyes fixed on Maria, who nodded and smiled back. That evening, during a rare family dinner around a long table draped in white silk candlelight, glinting off fine porcelain, the air felt heavy with an impending storm. Catherine, in a simple yet regal dark dress, could no longer hold back. She looked at William calmly, slicing his beef, and spoke, her voice trembling as she clung to composure. I thought being a mother would be the greatest joy, William. I imagined George running to me when he was sad, happy, or needed a hug. But now I feel like a stranger to him. William, with the steady calm of one accustomed to royal pressures, set down his knife, touching her hand to soothe her. Kate, you know we're not a normal family. We have duties to the nation, to the throne. Maria's just doing her job. She can't replace you. But William's words, though sincere, couldn't quell the ache in Catherine's heart. She gazed out the window where silvery moonlight bathed the royal gardens, the roses whispering in the night stillness. A painful question echoed within. How could a mother compete with someone always present, always patient, always listening? In George's young heart, Maria wasn't just a nanny, she was Marta, a second mother offering comfort and joy that Catherine, despite her title, couldn't provide amid her whirlwind of duties. For the first time, Catherine felt the most precious thing in her life, her son's love, slipping away, and that unnamed fear began to sow the seeds of a storm brewing in the palace. July 2019, Kensington Palace gleamed like a jewel under glittering chandeliers, their light dancing on ancient marble walls. The Grand Hall was adorned for Prince George's 6th birthday, a celebration not just for a boy, but a showcase of royal unity and authority. Long tables draped in white silk held exquisite dishes from steamed lobster to handcrafted macarons, sparkling under silver candelabras. Royals from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to dignitaries from neighboring nations gathered in an atmosphere of elegance laughter, mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. But beneath this perfect scene, a storm was brewing, ready to erupt. George, in a tailored navy suit, stood quietly by a window, his small hands gripping the silk curtains, his cheeks flushed with defiance, his eyes stubborn. Catherine, in a pearl-hued silk gown, knelt beside him, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "George, darling, today's your special day. Everyone's here to celebrate you. You'll be the star of the party like a true prince." But instead of the radiant smile she hoped for, George burst into tears, his voice cracking with anger. "I don't want to wear this. I don't want to party. I just want to stay home and eat Marta's biscuits." His cries pierced Catherine's heart like an arrow. She froze, arms outstretched but unmoving, as if time had stopped. The room seemed to hush with staff and guests, casting discreet glances, none daring to speak. George, not waiting for her response, broke free, his small feet racing down the hallway to Maria, his safe harbor in the emotional storm. "Marta," he called, voice breaking, and threw himself into her arms. Maria, with her characteristic calm, knelt stroking his head, whispering soothing Spanish words that quieted his sobs as if she were the only remedy for his distress. Catherine rose, her hands clenched until her knuckles whitened, her eyes blazing with long-suppressed fire. The perfect smile she wore for the public vanished, replaced by a mix of pain and fury. Without a word, she turned striding to her study, her heels clicking sharply on the marble like the beat of a breaking heart. No one dared follow, not even her closest aides. That night, under the cold glow of moonlight filtering through her study's window, Catherine confronted William in an argument unlike any in their years together. The room, with its marble walls and ancient bookshelves, seemed to absorb the tension. Catherine stood by the window, arms crossed tightly, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Look at this, William. Our son only wants to be with the help. What am I to him, a mother who only appears in family photos, or a princess standing behind protocol to polish the royal image I've tried? But George doesn't need me. He needs Maria." William, seated on a red velvet chair, tried to stay calm, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion and strain. He stood stepping closer, his voice low but firm. "Kate, you know we're not a normal family. We carry the weight of a nation, a throne. Do you think Elizabeth spent all day playing with Dad Maria's, just doing her job? She's not George's mother, and she can't replace you." Catherine shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice breaking as years of pent-up emotion erupted. "But I'm not Elizabeth, William, and George isn't a doll to hand off to others and place on a throne. I want him to know who his mother is. I want him to feel me, not just see me in newspapers or stage moments. Do you understand how this feels? Every time he calls Marta, I feel like I'm losing him." William reached for her shoulder, but Catherine stepped back, her eyes defiant. He sighed, his voice heavy with resignation. "Kate, I know it hurts, but George is the heir to the throne. We can't raise him like an ordinary child. He needs to be prepared to learn to face the public, to take on responsibility. Maria, she's just part of that process. If you let emotions take over, we can't help George become who he needs to be." William's logic only deepened Catherine's sense of isolation. She turned to the darkened royal gardens, her voice soft but resolute. "You talk about duty, about the throne. But have you ever thought that if we don't give him a real family, what will that throne mean? I don't want George to grow up just to be a king. I want him to be my son first." The argument stretched late into the night, their voices echoing in the sealed room, as if the marble walls absorbed their pain and tension. William, though, pained by his wife's anguish, held firm that George needed preparation for his future as king, not just as a child. Before leaving, he quietly called the royal advisors, his voice low but decisive. A plan was set in motion to begin George's political and social training earlier than planned, with lessons on protocol history and airship duties. But to do so, a painful decision loomed. Maria, the heart of George's world, the one he called Marta, with all his love, had to go. The decision, though unspoken, hung like a sharp blade ready to sever the bond between boy and Nanny and deepen the crack in Catherine's heart. On a gloomy morning, with London's skies cloaked in gray clouds, Maria was summoned to a small room in Kensington Palace's East Wing, a place rarely used reserved for the most private meetings. William and Catherine waited seated across from each other on red velvet chairs, the air heavy with the weight of an irrevocable judgment. William spoke first, his voice calm but laced with tension. "Maria, you've done exceptional work these past years. No one can deny that. But George is growing. It's time he learns about his responsibilities, his role in the royal family. The phase of having a nanny by his side every day, it's over." Catherine sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the marble floor, as if unable to meet Maria's gaze. Her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. Maria, in her simple Norland brown coat, remained silent. She looked at William, then at Catherine, the mother she had always respected, the one she hoped would understand her heart. After a moment, she asked, her voice soft but clear, echoing in the stillness. "When will I leave?" Catherine looked up, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. She replied, her voice steadying herself. "We'd like you to arrange a timeline and let us know." "But George, he knows. He wants to see you." Maria nodded, saying no more. She stood leaving the room with her usual composure, but her heart felt leaden. She found George in his room, sitting by the window, dim light falling on his young face. On his desk was an unfinished drawing, a dog with floppy ears like the one he'd described to her on peaceful afternoons. Seeing Maria, George set down his pencil, his eyes heavy with sadness, as if carrying the world's weight. "Mummy said, you won't be here anymore," he said, his voice trembling, eyes glistening with tears. Maria knelt, smiling, though her heart ached. "You're growing up, George, and sometimes growing up means saying goodbye to familiar things." "But I don't want you to go," George said, his voice breaking, as if clutching something precious about to slip away. "I know. I don't want to, either," Maria replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But the best thing a caregiver can do is let you walk on your own." George said no more. He nodded, his eyes locked on Maria, as if memorizing her face. She placed a hand on his shoulder lightly, then stood. She knew this moment would linger in both their hearts, a wordless farewell heavy with emotion. On her final night at Kensington Palace, the air felt thick with an invisible fog. In the small room Maria had called home for 9 years, a dim golden lamp cast light on cold marble walls. Maria packed her few belongings with her usual calm, some worn books on child psychology, a faded olive green cardigan, and her most treasured item, a childish drawing of a house under a sunny sky scrawled with "For Marta" in 5-year-old George's shaky crayon. She folded it gently, placing it in a small wooden box, as if tucking away a piece of her heart. But before Maria could leave, an unexpected event unfolded. Princess Anne, King Charles's forthright sister, learned of the decision to dismiss Maria. On a dreary afternoon, she arrived at Kensington Palace, demanding a private meeting with William and Catherine in a sealed room. Anne, with her stern demeanor and commanding voice, didn't hesitate to voice her dissent. "William, you're repeating my father's mistakes," Anne said, her sharp eyes fixed on her nephew. "I watched how Philip burdened Charles with protocol and royal duties from a young age, denying him a real childhood. What was the result? A gap between father and son that never closed. Do you want George to grow up like that? A boy stripped of love just to become a symbol?" William, standing by the window, arms crossed tightly, responded firmly, "Aunt Anne, times have changed. George is the heir to the throne. He needs to be prepared to learn responsibility. Maria's done well, but she can't stay with George forever. We must prioritize the monarchy's interests." Anne shook her head, her eyes flashing with disappointment. "The monarchy's interests are yours, William. You think removing Maria from George's life will make him a better king? You're taking away the person he loves most, the one who gives him security. Don't let George grow up with an empty heart like your father did." Catherine, seated at the table's end, listened in silence, her heart torn. Though she had felt jealous of George's bond with Maria, she didn't fully agree with William's cold approach. She spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "William, I don't want George to depend too much on Maria, but I also don't want him growing up without love. Aunt Anne is right. We can't force him into a mold just for the throne. I want George to have a family, not a palace full of protocol." William turned, his eyes tense. "Kate, don't you see? If we coddle George, he'll never learn to stand alone. The monarchy isn't a place for emotions to rule reason. We have to do this for his future." Catherine shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "George's future isn't just the throne, William. If he grows up without knowing family love, what will that throne mean?" The argument ended in a stalemate, with William holding firm and Anne leaving with a worried glance. Maria, unaware of the confrontation, continued packing. The next morning, she walked George to the dining room one last time. The 6-year-old moved slowly, hands clasped tightly, the air heavy with impending loss. George silently pushed a small craft paper package tied with blue silk ribbon toward her. Maria opened it, her hands trembling. Inside was a leather notebook, its first page inscribed in childish handwriting. "Thank you for being my first teacher." Maria smiled, placing a hand on George's shoulder. "Thank you, George. I'll keep this gift forever." There was no farewell party, no announcement. Maria left through the palace's back door, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestone. Catherine, watching from her study via security cameras, gripped the desk's edge. She wanted to run out to say thank you, but her feet felt rooted. No one bids farewell to the help. The door closed and the palace fell silent. In the quiet of Kensington Palace's study, light from a crystal chandelier bathed an ancient oak desk where Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat before a dense schedule. Red-inked lines mapped her duties: receptions, inaugurations, international tours, and meticulously crafted speeches. Each line reminded her of her role, not just a princess, but a royal symbol. But today her gaze lingered on a childish drawing under the desk glass, a dog with floppy ears, labeled Marta, left by George after her first overseas tour. The sketch wasn't just a gift. It was a wake-up call. She was letting the most precious thing in her lifetime with her children slip away. Catherine closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Images haunted her: George running to Maria's arms, calling Marta with love, his half-hearted glance when she tried to hug him. The argument with William and Princess Anne's warning about Philip's mistakes with Charles echoed in her mind. Catherine realized that while she didn't want George overly reliant on Maria, she couldn't accept William's push to thrust their son into protocol and duty, too soon repeating past errors. She didn't want George to grow up with an empty heart, knowing only the throne and not family love. One early morning, as dawn crept through silk curtains, Catherine summoned her protocol team and media advisors to the meeting room. Tension hung heavy as she stood, her voice firm yet emotional. "I want to revise the schedule, cut back on formal events, inaugurations, launches, photo op meetings, reassess them all." An advisor, visibly anxious, protested, "Your Highness, withdrawing will spark media speculation about palace discord or questions about your royal role." Catherine smiled faintly, her eyes burning with resolve. "Let them speculate. I don't need applause or glowing headlines. I need my children to know their mother is home when they need her." George Charlotte Lewis. "They need me, not a princess on a newspaper page." She signed the revised schedule, a simple act carrying the weight of a manifesto. From the next month, Catherine skipped most non-essential events. Instead, she made small but meaningful changes, driving Charlotte to school each morning, packing sandwiches and fruit for Louis's lunch, and sitting with George in the reading room each night. Under the warm glow of a lamp, she shared royal history in a gentle voice, weaving questions to spark his curiosity, turning dry lessons into vivid stories. William, still believing George needed preparation for his future role, didn't oppose Catherine's decision. But a distance lingered, not discord, but a difference in vision for their son's future. Catherine chose action over further arguments, focusing on rebuilding her bond with George step by step. 8 months after Maria's departure, Catherine carried a lingering guilt. The decision to dismiss Maria, though born from protecting her maternal role, now gnawed at her. Had she been too hasty, too selfish, letting jealousy cloud her gratitude? Princess Anne, in a private meeting, reiterated her warning. Don't let George grow up with voids in his heart, Kate. Maria wasn't the enemy, she helped him become who he is. Anne's words and the Marta drawing on her desk spurred Catherine to act. One afternoon, she penned a rare handwritten letter, a rarity in the digital age. On Palace stationery, her elegant script carried deep emotion. Dear Maria, I owe you an apology. For years, you poured your heart into caring for George, giving him a home I couldn't provide amid royal duties. I once felt threatened by the bond he shared with you, but I now see you never replaced me. You were an essential part of his journey. Thank you for everything. I hope one day we could meet so I can thank you in person. Catherine. She sent the letter to Maria's West London address, enclosing a new drawing by George, a house under a sunny sky inscribed, "For Marta, my first teacher." Catherine didn't expect an immediate reply, but the act eased her guilt like closing a painful chapter to start anew with her son. Meanwhile at the palace, Catherine continued strengthening her bond with George. She organized family evenings of painting or games, encouraging George to share memories of Maria. When he asked about her, Catherine smiled. Maria is special, George. She loves you so much, and I know you love her too. But I'm here, and I'll always be here for you. George nodded, his eyes brightening, and for the first time he hugged her tightly. Catherine felt his warmth, knowing she was reclaiming her place in his heart. In the gentle spring sunlight of West London, Maria Teresa Turian Borrallo received Catherine's letter along with George's new drawing, a house under a sunny sky labeled, "For Marta, my first teacher." She sat by her window reading Catherine's elegant words, her fingers tracing George's childish scrawl. Tears glistened, but a smile bloomed. The letter was recognition, a bridge between two women who loved George. Maria placed the drawing on her bookshelf beside the leather notebook he'd given her the day she left and wrote a brief reply to Catherine, offering heartfelt thanks without promising a reunion. For her memories of George, his Marta calls and clear eyes were enough to warm her heart for a lifetime. At Kensington Palace, the atmosphere had shifted. Princess Anne's warning about Philip's mistakes with Charles and Catherine's emotional talks forced William to reflect. He'd believed early protocol training was best for George's kingship. But Anne's words about the unbridgeable gap between Philip and Charles, and Catherine's pain over wanting to be a true mother, stirred regret. Had he been repeating his grandfather's errors, turning George into a tool of the throne, rather than a loved child? One afternoon, William sat in his study, gazing at a family photo, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis beaming during a rare picnic. He realized that while the throne was George's destiny, he needed a family and love to grow with a strong heart. William quietly called his advisors, revising his schedule. He cut non-essential events, declined long tours, and spent more time with his children, taking Charlotte and Louis to the park, playing soccer with George in the royal gardens, and even attempting Biscuit's flowers, staining his shirt to hear their joyous laughter. Catherine, seeing William's change, felt a weight lift. Together, they built family moments, puzzle nights, weekends at Armour Hall, where the family ran through fields, laughter free of protocol. One evening, in the cozy glow of the living room's lamp, George spoke, his voice small but thoughtful. Do you think Maria misses me? Catherine and William exchanged a look of newfound understanding. Catherine touched George's shoulder, her voice warm. I'm sure she misses you every day, George. Maria loves you so much, and you'll always be special to her. William smiled, leaning close to his son, his voice warm. I think so too, George. And I'm sorry for being so busy before. From now on, I'll be here more to play soccer, tell stories, and make terrible biscuits for you. George laughed, his giggles shattering the room's stillness. He threw himself into his parents' arms, a hug tighter than ever. Catherine and William held him, feeling his warmth, as Charlotte and Louis joined the family, wrapped in a big embrace. Laughter echoing, banishing the palace's cold walls. As time passed, Catherine and William built a true home. They hosted picnic story nights and invited Princess Anne for dinner, where she smiled pleased as George chatted about his drawings. Though Maria was gone, her love and comfort lived on in George's heart. Kensington Palace, now filled with laughter, taught Catherine and William that to raise a future king, they first had to raise a happy child. Maria from afar left an indelible mark, but Catherine and William's love and change wrote a new chapter, one of a joyful family, where the throne never outweighed love. Does this story of Catherine, William, and George's family bond move you? What do you think of Maria's journey and the lasting imprint she left on a future king's heart?